All right, Sam, what are we talking about today?
All right, today I think that what we're talking about, let me look at my notes here. Today looks like we're gonna cover the SuperCIM thing that I built and talk about the agents tool that you built for with Lindy, right?
Yep, I want to talk about a bake-off that I did with three contenders, Lindy.ai, N8n, and home-rolled Python solution.
Oh, you did three.
I did three.
And what was the purpose of that?
So the purpose was twofold. One, it was just as a favor to a friend. He's helping some friends job prospect, so they're tech salespeople, and he was telling me he was frustrated with all of his AI tools because they would hallucinate. He had a list of 700 companies, and he wanted to find which ones were hiring, which ones were growing, which ones were good for people in tech sales, but not necessarily the industry that they're in, cybersecurity. And so he asked me if I could help him. And I thought it was a great excuse to test some of these new agentic workflow automation platforms. So I've been hearing a lot about Lindy and N8n, and so I jumped in with those. And so yeah, that was the primary purpose. I think it's really relevant for us though as well though because lead enrichment for job prospects is the exact same framework and workflow as it is for deal sourcing or for outbound sales or anything like that. And so getting the building blocks right is something good for us to be able to speak to more confidently with the tools out there.
And N8n and Lindy, these are like make.com or Zapier or something. It's like an iteration of that, right?
It is, it is. I would say, yeah, I'll dig into the actual differences to as the precursor for that. N8n, I believe, has been around a little bit longer. It's much more akin to a Zapier or Make.com, but I think more developer friendly. It's more for somebody who's more familiar with coding. Lindy is, my assessment, is sort of an agent first version of those things, where it's what it most often wants you to do is assign an agent to perform a task as opposed to an automation, as opposed to code, as opposed to some sort of pre-built integration with existing service.
Got it. And how'd it go? Like what happened?
All right, let's jump in. Okay, so let's start with Lindy. That was the first one I did. I had watched a video podcast with the founder of Lindy, as a French guy in San Francisco named Florian, I believe. And they had been around for a couple years, but they had two recent announcements. One was this concept of agent swarms. So it's this new capability they have, which rather than have agents work linearly in progression, it allows agents to work asynchronously. So for this use case, I thought it was kind of perfect. So rather than actually iterate through 700 companies and 700 LinkedIn URLs and 700 forms, and cells all over again, it spins up 700 independent agents, all with their own fresh context window and does it at once. So not only do you save time by doing that, you have much less likely to hallucinate, and it gives you kind of an answer for each one. What I found with Lindy was it's extremely easy to use, kind of right out of the box. Has a ton of pre-built integrations. So when you're empowering your agent, kind of the way that the interface works is you first select a trigger. So what is the action that's going to kick off this workflow? So in our use case, it was simply adding a new row to a Google Sheet. So each company name we had filled out, 700 of them, but we didn't have any of the custom columns, to the right. We wanted 10 more fields. So you set the trigger, then you set up the agent, and you give it powers, you give it skills, right? So like you select the agent and you pre-prompt it what you ask it to do. Mine was something like, you're helping me identify companies that are hiring for sales, and you're determining what requirements they need, what keywords are most likely to fill out, find in their job descriptions, and if somebody needs cybersecurity and specifically a background to be able to work at this company. So you pre-prompt it. You give it what skills it has. So my agents had LinkedIn skills, web browsing skills, obviously Google Sheets skills, and all of those are just like you're just authorizing. So literally authorizing with my LinkedIn account, authorizing with Google Sheets. And that's important here because the other formats, you have to go grab API keys. You have to sort of know your way around the back ends of systems. With Lindy, you're just connecting your accounts, which is kind of
So
like,
it's like something any PE could use themselves.
yes, for sure. An
Got it.
analyst could use it. And then what you do with the agent is you give it success criteria. And so in this instance, it's exit criteria. It cannot exit its agent loop until it's satisfied your criteria. And it's kind of great in that like it will try different things, because the agent's able to think. So if it tries a Google search and doesn't get what it wants, it'll try another Google search until it finds the information it was looking
Oh,
for.
that's huge.
Really huge. So my big takeaway with Lindy is it did, after kind of 30 minutes of setup, it poured over 700 companies, did its damnedest. It's like really trying. And it's really fun to watch all of these agents come to life. Like on your screen, you see 700, forms, all go up and they're all spinning and they're all thinking and they're all doing something at once. And it filled out most of it. It didn't get everything, but it probably got 85% of the way there. The downside with all of that is it just eats credits for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So like their business model is that it's credit based, and credits are kind of this opaque relative term. They don't tell you ahead of times how much something's going to cost credit wise, but it's, I guess, it's token based. It's some sort of
Yeah.
something on top of tokens, and
I feel like they're all like that. All the workhow systems have
they're not
completely
all like
opaque
that though.
pricing.
Yeah, but so it went through, just to give you a sense, for 700 companies, let's call it 10 custom fields for each of those things. Burned through 15,000 credits. And the pro account, that they charge, I think $70 a month for, gives you 6,000 credits a month. So like
Six.
you couldn't do this an entire month, of the pro account. So I had to up it to the highest level, and actually then you start a new account to get some more credit somewhere else for free and to finally actually get through. Yeah.
What's the highest level?
I think it gives you 30,000
For how
at the
much?
highest level. Yeah, for a few $100 a month.
A few $100 a month.
Yeah.
So the reason I think about this is kind of what we talked about the other day, is like, yes, that's extremely expensive if you're a consumer, but if you're a company, it may make sense. If you're sourcing, if you're an analyst trying to source new deals, and I don't know, you've got to go through 2,000 companies a month or something, to pay $600 a month is also nothing.
And this is my thinking as well. If you're replacing a high price subscription, because there's this big, I want to dig into this more, but there's a whole world out there of lead enrichment, lead lists, subscriptions you
Yeah.
can buy.
Yeah.
Apollo's one, Clay's one, Grotto's one. There's all
Well, and
these
for
things.
PE, it's like PitchBook
Yep.
and I can't remember the names of the others, but there's a bunch of them.
Right, right. But those are giving you a menu of fields, deterministic. They pre-vet them, and so you can pick the fields you want with what plan you have. So I think there's two really clear values for doing this yourself. You can select what columns you want, and it doesn't even need to be a deterministic thing. It can be an inferred value. So for instance, does this job require cybersecurity? That's an assessment that I'm having the LLM make for me, right? As opposed to just
Right.
go get objective data, right? And the other one is, if you can get rid of one of those subscriptions because you're going to go scrape the websites yourself, maybe it does just immediately pay for itself,
Right.
on a basis. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so you tried Lindy. There were some others.
Yep. Tried N8n next. N8n, my assessment is, if you were to do this at scale in a more production ready way, I would do it in N8n. You have a lot more control. It's much more grounded in classic automation like Zapier. So you are setting up your API calls, you're picking how you're doing the scraping, you're writing more code, and you're spending more time in like configuration panels, So it's like you're
Yeah.
setting keys here. And the pros and cons of that are, you have a lot more control and it's much more cost effective. So you pay per workflow in N8n, not per credit. So you can run this entire thing and it's basically per row. Think about it, you pay
Yeah.
a cost per row, and it's cents. So it would be cents per row, as opposed to potentially dollars
Got
for
it.
Lindy.
So for that same thing, instead of $300, it's maybe $10 or something.
Yeah, probably.
Got
But
it.
you really got to know what you're doing. And I hit so many roadblocks. If I had been, I don't know, maybe less tired or asked better questions, I probably could have solved some of those. For instance, like I tried to just scrape HTML from LinkedIn and some websites with Cloudflare, and just do it myself. And I know those are notoriously difficult platforms to do that on, and so I should have just relied on an API of somebody who had already built a scraper specifically for LinkedIn and called that, instead of just going to get an HTTPS get from.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. I've tried that before too, to scrape LinkedIn, and that's an incredibly difficult thing to get right. So if you were trying to do that from scratch, I don't know if that's the best test.
Yeah,
Using
totally.
one of those LinkedIn scraper APIs is probably
Yeah,
better for that.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So you kind of got there, but it also, this is a really small thing, but it's like a user experience. The agent system in Lindy always gives you an answer. So like we were talking before, if it doesn't find a
Right.
before, it'll try again. It'll try new things for you, and that's really nice. If any part of the chain breaks in N8n, you just get a fail. You just get a red box that says this didn't work. And so that was the air handling. It's much more. I don't know what the right term is there, but it's brittle. It's a brittle chain as opposed to this sort of organic thing that's trying its best.
I imagine if you got pretty good with N8n, or if you just contracted that portion of it out, I would think you'd be able to replicate that. And maybe it's with prompting and maybe it's with the error handling. I used to use Make a lot, and it had error handling workflows that were probably the most complicated part of the experience, but
Sure.
they were powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. So those were those two. And then just this morning, I completed a custom lead enrichment web app using Cursor. And I basically just gave it my specs. And so to give you a sense, you've got your 700 companies, and I wanted to do two things. I wanted it first to get summary information for all of those companies. So what do they do? Where are they headquartered? Are they hiring? Are they growing? And I wanted the first LLM to answer a question that I was calling company pulse. So is this company worth kind of putting on my list as a job prospect? But you could have any criteria there. I wanted kind of macro trends. Are they growing? Did they take a down round? That kind of stuff, and make an
Yeah.
assessment whether this is a good company. And then if yes, and they are hiring, I had it pull in and scrape actual job postings, from either their career page or LinkedIn or Indeed. And then another LLM to go look at all those job descriptions and pull out keywords, pull out that answer about, cybersecurity experience. And so
Wait. So tell me how you set this all up. This is Python. This is what frameworks are you
this
using?
is Streamlit Python using a Python scraper called Beautiful Soup,
Yeah.
and so
And then GPT to analyze it?
yes, GPT to analyze it, but I had Gemini 2.5 preview write all the code for this, and
Got it.
yeah. And so
So
the
the
trade-offs here
work,
are
yeah, cool.
the
Keep going.
trade-offs here
Sorry.
are you have to know how to set up your environment, so I have to set up my actual file, my folder structure. I got to put all my API keys. I had to actually give it Google Cloud API access to write to Google Sheets, which I didn't have to do in any of these other things. So that was
Yeah,
sort of
that's a pain in the
interesting.
ass.
Yeah, but then once you're doing that, it's the interface. I'm very comfortable talking to the LLM, and so prompting it and having it go write code and come back to me and is just something I'm really familiar with, I think. And so that took probably 45 minutes, and it's a custom Streamlit app that is connected to this Google Sheet where it pulls everything in two steps and enriches everything, and then it goes and does the job hunting part of it. It worked at better fidelity than the other two.
Really?
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Okay. That's kind of what I thought would happen, but it's still surprising to hear somehow that writing your own custom thing is often faster and better. I feel like that's where everything is going.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's my default right now too, though, but I think that there's still a world for the Lindy kind of for both those things, for both Lindy and N8n. I was a little bit standing on the shoulders of the work I had already done, for the cursor based solution. So
Yeah.
I had already gotten all the links, links to the URLs that I needed to scrape because Lindy did that for me. And I didn't want to rewrite that for cursor.
Gotcha.
If you were starting from scratch, I mean, any lead list comes with some links, and so I think
Right.
you're likely there anyway. But you'd have to solve for that, up front as well.
Now, did you get the job postings page from Lindy, or did you have cursor? Okay, so you already had both links that you needed. Got it. Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's just because I think this is relevant to a lot of businesses, not just PE businesses, but portcos as well, because it's the same lessons learned for job hunting are the ones you could do for deal sourcing or for actual outbound sales, and so that's why I think this is worth doing.
I mean, we've seen that already with clients wanting to do deal sourcing that way, and evaluate, are these companies real? Are they growing? That kind of thing.
Exactly.
And also news and trend stuff
Yep. Exactly.
to match up to that. Okay, cool. This makes me think of the DocuSign thing I did yesterday, where we needed to send a proposal to a client, and it just made sense to have DocuSign as part of that, and or we needed the document itself signed, but I just didn't want to pay for DocuSign. I don't know why. I have a really hard time with that
Yeah.
these days. And I went into Cursor, and literally 10 minutes, I'm not exaggerating about that at all, literally 10 minutes, created you sign it, you actually put your signature, draw your signature with a mouse, and it converts all that to a PDF, embeds it, has the client's name already in it, and just recreated DocuSign. That's
Yeah.
wild.
It's wild. It's completely wild, but it leads me to this like existential question I keep coming back to, which is that like it's so easy and quick to make a 1.0 version of these services, to solve my problem right now, in the next 30 minutes.
Right.
But that you'll probably never go back to that code ever again. Right? Like you're not going to actually build it out and make it good and iterate on it and add new features to the level DocuSign has or anything like that. So it's like,
Sure.
yeah, are we, one way to think about it, it's really easy to replace the free tier of SaaS. It's like the most basic model, but the stuff that they're charging for is the hard stuff that like we're probably not going to recreate. What do you think about that?
I sort of agree. I half agree with that. I think, part of what we are building a lot. Okay, half of it is these tools like an audio transcriber. The other day I needed to my voice memos app, which I use all the time to record meetings, wasn't working on my Mac. It was working to record, but it wasn't doing the transcription that it's supposed to do natively. And so all I had was the MP4 file, and I needed that transcribed so that I could then summarize the meeting. And so I looked around for some things that would do that. Everything was $5 or $10 a month, and I was unwilling to do that. And so I vibe coded in about 10 minutes an audio transcriber. I do go back and use that. I use that all the time. And I have a number of things like that I am continually revisiting and often expanding on. But that's very much like that works for me, and I may share that with you or something, but I'm not going to share that with the world. It's just not ready. It's not prime time. At the same time, we are building things like we'll talk about the SuperCIM in a second. We're building things that do work at the corporate level. And the thing about it is what you can do when you code it yourself is give the user 100% of what they need
Right.
without all those other features. And actually, I feel like that's an advantage half the time. Because yes, with DocuSign, you may have the ability to do some esoteric thing where it faxes a copy of something. I don't know what DocuSign's advanced features are, but
Permissions. Let's use that. You could have all sorts.
permissions, great. But I would argue that there are companies, Fortune 500s, that absolutely need that stuff, but the vast majority of companies that use DocuSign don't. They don't need those advanced features. And there are probably some things that are missing from those feature sets of DocuSign, but it doesn't make sense. You just don't worry about it because you can't ask them to make some new thing. It never works. So I'm still very excited about the prospect of building custom tooling and, having companies, whether they do that through consultants like us or just do it themselves, iterate on those things over time to make them suitable to their business.
All right. I want to hear about SuperCIM.
Okay. This is a super fun project I've been noodling on for a while and have recently gone through some new iterations. Let me shut off my notifications.
Grounded a bit for non-PE clients. Like SuperCIM is spelled
Yeah.
C-I-M.
Yeah, it's very much applicable. It's like all of these things. It's applicable to non-PE people too. But like, just because the problem is one of document management and synthesis, and so in the PE world, you have these things called confidential information memorandum. These are basically deal decks, and they say, I have this company, it's growing really fast, and you should invest in us because we're awesome. And these things often come in the form of one-page PDFs, but they often come in the form of 40-page PDFs that are slide decks. They often are accompanied by other document types. And then also, as the deal progresses, and as the PE expresses interest and says, okay, we like this, we want to see more, the amount of documents associated with a given company that the PE must intake expands exponentially. And so you might end up with 20 or 40. So the first version of this is simply taking those deal decks, and it's really cool. So what we do is originally we thought we would process with the LLM using GPT-4 Vision what's in those deal decks, convert that into structured data using, again, like a different call with the LLM, and then put that in a database so that you essentially drag and drop a PDF into this interface, and then it gets added to as a row that has a visual representation of what's their revenue, what's their EBITDA, who are the key players, who are the key clients, what does this company even do? And then you can click into that and see all of that charted over time. And importantly, and this is kind of the whole point, once you can drag and drop 50 documents into there. And once you've done that, you can sort and filter and say, okay, now today I'm interested in companies that have at least a profit margin of 20%. And I don't even want to think about anything else. And so you can filter that way. But also you can create cool visualizations and show like, a bubble chart where the size of the bubble reflects the head count, and it's on a matrix where revenue is one dimension and profit is another, or something like that.
What are you doing
And
for non-standard metrics? So not all deal decks, I imagine. I'm sure they all have EBITDA, but if there's some KPI that's specific to this industry or this business, are does the AI use that as a put in the database, or is it only looking for certain things?
we specify the things that it looks for. So for like a given client, the client might say, I'm interested in, I built sort of a default one, but another client might say, okay, I love this, but I'm particularly interested in headcount growth. And so I really want to, if they have an employee count, I want that, but I also want to see that over time. And so if that is anywhere within the 40 pages of these docs, your job is to extract that. It's custom coding, but it's very, from my perspective, lightweight. This is like, okay, I'll update this in a couple hours. And then you're essentially you're adding new elements to the database, new rows in the database or tables that let us capture that. And then you're modifying the prompts that extract that into structured data to get that. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. So the PE determines what metrics they care for because they know what deals they're looking for and the things that they care about most, and that's the customization of it. And then the
Yeah, I think I might make this like a version of this available just to all of our clients, but
Mhm.
I highly suspect that most of them will want to do some modifications to suit their business. They're going to want different things. And in some cases, those will be extensible to everybody, and in some not. And in some, they may have this idea for, like, I want to evaluate based on this particular scorecard, and obviously that's proprietary, and so that's specific to the company.
Do you see opportunity to have the LLMs doing more analysis? Because one of the things an aha moment I had in my journey with the lead enrichment was that it didn't feel like I was using the LLMs to like the best version of them by just having them go pull out objective data and enter it into spreadsheets because that's the same stuff you're getting from the lead lists. What I wanted them to do was infer and deduce and make judgment calls. So it's like the prompting of how to assess the company pulse and the basically a recommendation on the job description. It finally felt like, okay, I'm adding something new to the party here with the LLM that's not on the page. Do you
Yeah.
see similar patterns in the SuperCIM?
Yeah, 1,000,000%. And this is like I've been on this bandwagon for a couple months now and trying to get people to understand there's different steps in this process to make it useful. And so like scraping is often a part of it, but if it's not scraping, there's data pre-processing. And often that happens with no AI at all. Often you just need to write some Python scripts to process that data or use existing frameworks for that. But it's just as critical as any fancy analysis that you're going to do with the LLM. So in the case of the SuperSim thing that I was talking about, that's just like the initial step, capturing what's the information that's in the deal decks and visualizing them and letting you sort and filter in a cool way. The next step of adding in, okay, now we've decided we're interested in this company. We've intaking all of their financial information. Okay, now we've invested in this company. Now we're getting quarterly investment summaries and we're getting financial updates as Excel sheets. You have to pre-process all of that data into something that the LLM can read, usually in the form of Markdown. And there's a handful of ways to do that are probably too technical for the scope of this, but pre-processing is a big part of it. And then I would say in the middle is just like, what is the architecture of the whole system? You have to do the pre-processing and then you have to send that data around in a pipeline. And sometimes you're doing that locally if it's a one-time thing, or sometimes you're actually building this on AWS and you're running scripts nightly to do this sort of thing. And then, only then, if you have everything structured in a database well, can you do the really cool stuff, which is what you're talking about. And it's where this turns into like Moneyball for business and gets really exciting and fun. And we've done some of this, obviously, but that's when you can start asking questions like, okay, across 100 deals, what seem to be the key factors that drive success? Or, like, here's our existing scoring algorithm that we use to evaluate deals where we have analysts or, the PEs themselves going in and saying, we think this is good on this dimension and that not good on that dimension. How well does that actually work?
Right. Well, but you introduce a whole other concept there that I want to go a little bit more into. And I think the way my brain thinks about this as sort of a non-technical marketing background guy is like hard skills versus soft skills. And like, so scraping and pre-processing is like hard code. It's like
It's old school.
yeah, old school. It's Python, it's getting stuff. And that gets it to a place where you can structure the data, but then it also gets it into a markdown file, which is what the LLM wants. Like it uses that better than it would even the structured tabular data, right? Like the
Oh,
markdown file
100%.
gold for the LLM, right? And so you have an opportunity there to use the soft skills of the LLM to generate hypotheses, to actually create other structured data from this, to deduce from that point of view. And then you have the same exact loop on the back end. Because what you're talking about, the Moneyball stuff, linear regression, analytic, kind of stuff, that's another hard school. That's another hard, skill.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
like you're running statistics on these things. And then you have another thing at the end of that, which is to pass that back to the LLM for more soft skills. It can generate
Exactly.
more hypotheses. It can get the conclusions. It can do all those things.
Exactly. Yeah, there's two ways of looking at the data at the end. Once you get it to the end of the pipeline and you have it in a structured data format, the one method is what you're talking about, like old school, running multivariate regressions and saying, does founder track record of exits predict future success in MOIC terms or something like that. And then you can use that to create a predictive model where you take in new data and say, I've got a new deal deck, throw it in there, have it process it, and then predict the outcome. That stuff's really cool. That's super exciting. But the other domain is the really creative and interesting part, which is just taking that data. A lot of times you got kind of like go back to step 2 and grab the markdown file itself. Or you can also take the structured data that you've created in step 3 and synthesize that and then start having the LLM compare it. And the LLM, depending on which one you use, especially if you use a high context model like Gemini 2.5, something like that, where you have 2 million tokens to play with, then you can like just give it all the raw data and say, what do you see? And it becomes a really creative exercise, which is like the new dominant thing that people should be trying to learn, is how to ask good questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally.
And that's like half of our job.
Right.
So anyway, I'm super jazzed about this. I think it's going to go somewhere really interesting, and yeah, obviously it's extensible beyond PE. But the reason I love doing this stuff in PE is because they just have all the data, and it's like perfectly ready to go.
Yep. Yep.
And it never 2 years ago, having a folder full of 40 documents of all different types was useless, except to an analyst who was willing to dive in and spend 16 hours going through that.
Totally. I want to like build on that statement because you said they have all the data. They all think that they're data poor. Maybe it's like because they don't have this rich database of a I don't know, a Snowflake instance with a bunch of historical. I
Yeah.
think people think about data, they think about big data, and what we're talking about is unstructured PDFs is gold for what we're
Gold
trying
mine.
to call them. Yeah. Yeah.
Gold mine. I think this is true in a bunch of other industries as well, and I just happen to like be closer to PE. But I've got a buddy in oil and gas, and I know that he's sitting on a treasure trove of PDFs from like representing leases from the AIDS. And there's
That's
so
cool.
much in there.
All right, Sam, to wrap this up, let's just both go through the coolest things that we saw in AI this week, or the thing you're most excited about you want to share with the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go first. So mine is Google 2.5 experimental. This is not new this week, but I do think people are sleeping on it. You can access this if you just Google AI Studio. That'll take you right there, and you can use it for free. It's wild that the best-in-class model is completely free right now. The thing to know about that is if you're using the free version and you're not using it through the API, they're training on that. So
Ah,
buyer beware, or non-buyer beware. But it's fantastic, and it has a 2 million token context window. So yeah, that and O3, frankly, if you think you are up to date on AI and you haven't been using O3 and you haven't been using 2.5, your information is outdated. You have to try those.
totally, totally. So that's GPT o3, and that's Gemini 2.5 research preview. Is that the model? That's the
Yeah,
right
I
one?
think it's called 2.5 experimental and then parentheses research preview. They
I
got to
love
figure out these names.
Google is the worst company in the history of companies at naming things.
I don't know.
Right?
OpenAI is pretty bad too.
That's true. That's true. Maybe that can be our new industry. I'd love to be a branding consultant for just naming AI stuff. If anybody's out there, let me know. The two I'll talk about are one we've already mentioned, Lindy. I think pretty much everybody, their free trial is pretty generous. I know I was complaining about the uses of credits for the kind of bulk lead enrichment, but for things like call transcribing, yay type of use cases for agents. Even they can make phone calls on your behalf. They have all kinds of neat stuff out of the box and pre-made templates and recipes. So I would suggest most people go give it a whirl. Try to find something in your day-to-day workflow that you can automate and improve with Lindy Agent for fun. Second is this week, I believe it was this week, could have even been like yesterday, GPT, the new GPT image API was launched. And so we've been able to use the new GPT 4.0 image, within OpenAI, ChatGPT.com, but now people will be able to build with it into their own applications. And so I'm looking
Oh
forward
yeah.
I'm looking forward to see what I can do and how we can build that into our workflows. And I think we're about to see a lot of interesting new SaaS applications
Wait,
for.
real quick, I think you should make the pitch for the new image gen itself because that's only like 2 or 3 weeks old, and I think some people have heard about it, but definitely not everybody has used it. And I don't think at the risk of extending this podcast too long, I don't think people understand the business implications of what that can do.
Sure, I won't do the best job at this. I could probably find a resource, maybe we can put it in the notes or something that has an actual rundown of how much better it is than other things. But in my use of it, it is much more consistent in its delivery of images. And so for things like product photography or stuff where you're trying to abide by a brand guide, things like that, it just listens to the prompts much, much better. So people are
Yeah,
able to generate lots and
it's
lots of
accurate.
marketing based material. So for industries in sales enablement or for digital ads, things like that, I think it's definitely a game changer. My wife's an interior designer, and so one of the use cases we've been really keen on is interior design photography. Almost every single model up until this point had an impossible time keeping. So if you take a picture of a room and you want to change out the couch and the pillows and leave everything else the same, no model previously was ever able to do that. It would generate a new room. It would change things that you didn't ask it for. It had no sort of consistency between the two, the reference material and then what it was creating. This
Right.
model pretty seamlessly can do applications like that. So take a picture of your living room, say you want to swap out the sofa, change the carpet, paint the walls, any of those things discreetly, and it'll do it more times than not. It's not perfect. I've run into some times, but if you get
Sure.
good at doing it, you can definitely make those use cases happen.
Yeah, I remodeled my kitchen, replaced the cabinets. It's really good at taking an existing image and modifying it to your specification. So, like, think displacing Photoshop.
Hmm.
One of the use cases that I saw that I think is absolutely wild is I have a couple friends in commercial real estate who are doing several things with this. One, like it used to be, they used to spend between $500,000 and $500,000 to have architects render things, and now they're literally they're completely removing the need for that by just taking a photo with a drone of the site and saying put a building here that looks like this because that's what they need to sell the concept. And
Right?
prior they had to spend so much money on that. I really wonder what's going to happen with the part of the architecture business that is rendering. I really feel like that's going to go away.
Right, right. I mean, they'll still need the architects to make sure it's structurally sound, but
Well, I
not
got to
in the
build the
sales
thing for
process, I guess.
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of that time and effort was just going into rendering. I looked at some new vision stuff for downtown Austin yesterday with a buddy, and the renders were beautiful. And I just thought, and I asked him how much they spent on it. I said $50,000, and like that $50,000 is not going to that person who rendered that in a year.
Right.
No
Insane.
question. And then the other thing that model does really well is text. So for the first time, you can say, make me a flyer that has this exact text, and it'll do it. Cool. All right. Those are good tools. This was great. I think for a first run, not bad.
Yeah, I look forward to never watching this ever again.
All right. Cool.
See ya.
Bye.